Hey guys, tonight we trudge through the mud and mist to find shelter in a place that medieval society politely called a stew, but you might recognize as the most chaotic establishment in town, a medieval brothel. We're going to explore a world that smells like cheap perfume, stale beer, and profound regret, a place where the walls are thin and the hygiene standards are, frankly, theoretical. It is a feverish dream of an establishment, louder than a tavern and darker than a dungeon. You probably won't survive the night without catching something, whether it's a flea, a fever, or a felony charge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love picturing you all safe in your beds while we wade through the muck of history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on a cobblestone street that has seen better days, though to be fair, in the medieval period, better days usually just meant days with slightly less plague. It is late. The sky is a heavy, bruised purple, hanging low over the timber-framed buildings that crowd the narrow alleyway. The air outside is cold, damp, and carries the distinct, earthy aroma of a city that hasn't quite figured out sewage systems yet. But you aren't staying outside. You are pushing open a heavy, iron-bound oak door that creaks with the weight of 1,000 secrets. As the door swings inward, you are immediately hit by a wall of sensory information. If modern buildings are designed for airflow and light, this place was designed for the exact opposite. It is what the locals call a stew, a term that technically refers to a bathhouse, but has evolved to mean something far more complicated. Stepping across the threshold, the first thing you notice is the heat. It's not the comfortable warmth of central heating. It's a sticky biological warmth generated by too many bodies packed into a space with absolutely no ventilation. It feels less like entering a room and more like walking into the mouth of a very tired, very unwashed beast. The space before you is described by contemporaries as more than the darkest hell, which seems a bit dramatic until you've been standing there for 30 seconds. It is a chaotic hybrid of an inn, a tavern, and a feverish dream that you might have after eating bad cheese before bed. The architecture itself seems confused. The ceiling beams are low, darkened by decades of soot, forcing you to hunch slightly, as if the building itself is trying to compress you. Let's talk about the smell. In the medieval world, smells are navigation tools, and this room has a scent profile that is practically a landmark. The air is thick, almost chewable. It's a pungent cocktail of wood smoke, cheap rosewater perfume trying desperately to mask body odor, stale beer that has soaked into the floorboards, and the greasy, acrid scent of tallow candles. Tallow, for those who don't know, is rendered animal fat, usually beef or mutton, and when it burns, it smells like a barbecue gone wrong. It's the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and hair, a souvenir you didn't ask for. It permeates everything. It's the scent of regret, thick and undeniable. Visually, the room is a masterpiece of shadow and grime. The lighting is intentionally dim, provided by those sputtering candles that drip up hot grease onto the tables and occasionally the patrons. The darkness is a feature, not a bug. It hides the stains on the walls and the dubious cleanliness of the tankards. The flickering light casts long, dancing shadows against the plaster walls, making the room feel like it's moving, breathing. It's atmospheric, sure, But in the same way, a haunted house is atmospheric. You navigate through narrow passageways that snake between the main common area and the back rooms. These corridors are tight, forcing you to brush shoulders with people you definitely don't want to touch. The floor is covered in rushes, dried reeds or straw scattered to soak up spills, mud, and whatever else falls down there. In a high-end castle, these rushes might be changed regularly and scented with sweet herbs. Here, under your boots, the rushes feel mitted and damp, a compost heap in the making. This establishment operates in a fascinating legal gray area. It's worth noting a mainstream historical fact here. Despite the church's heavy moralizing, many of these stews, particularly in places like London's Southwark district, were actually owned or licensed by bishops. They were considered a necessary evil to prevent worse chaos in the streets. So, in a way, standing here in this den of iniquity, you are technically on church-sanctioned ground. It's a bit like finding out your local dive bar is owned by the Department of Motor Vehicles. Confusing, but strangely bureaucratic. As you move deeper into the room, the noise washes over you. It's a cacophony of languages and accents. You hear the rough shouting of soldiers, the hushed negotiations of merchants, and the occasional crash of pottery. It's loud, but there's a rhythm to it, a chaotic heartbeat. This isn't just a place of business, it's a social hub for people who don't fit into the polite society of the guild halls or the solemnity of the cathedral. It's the medieval equivalent of a Reddit thread come to life, messy, unfiltered, and full of people claiming to be someone they aren't. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these establishments in the late medieval period was a sign of moral decay or simply a booming economy, creating a new class of urban workers with disposable income and no families. Some suggest that the stews were actually safer for the workers than the unregulated streets, providing a weird sort of corporate structure to the oldest profession. Standing here, watching a man try to pay for a drink with a chicken, you can see the logic. It's organized chaos. The vibe is undeniably intense. You get the feeling that anything could happen here. A fight could break out, a marriage could end, or someone could accidentally invent a new disease. It's a high-stakes environment. The air is heavy with smoke, yes, but also with anticipation. Everyone here is looking for something, distraction, comfort, or just a place to get out of the rain. You find a spot near a wall, trying to look casual while leaning against a timber beam that feels greasy to the touch. You realize quickly that clean is a relative term here. In the modern world, we panic if a restaurant table has a watermark on it. Here, the filth is structural. It's load-bearing grime. The walls are stained with soot and time, and the ceiling is a tapestry of cobwebs that flutter in the draft. It's honestly impressive how much dirt one room can hold without collapsing. Despite the squalor, there is a strange, feverish energy to the place. It's the energy of people living in a time where life expectancy is short and the plague is always just a rat bite away. Why save your copper coins for retirement when you might not make it to 30? You might as well spend them here in this smoky, loud, foul-smelling room. It's the YOLO philosophy, but with more dysentery. As you stand there, taking it all in, you realize this isn't just a building, it's a living organism. The feverish dream description is accurate because everything feels slightly distorted. The laughter is too loud, the shadows are too long, and the beer is definitely too warm. It's an assault on the senses, a place that demands your full attention just to navigate the room without tripping over a stool or insulting a mercenary. This is your new home for the night. It's not the Ritz. It's not even a Motel 6. It is a medieval brothel, a place where the air is thick with smoke and secrets, and the only thing guaranteed is that you will leave with a story, if you remember it. You take a deep breath, instantly regret it because of the smell, and prepare to venture further into this architectural disaster. You leave the main common area, squeezing past a table where a game of dice is getting aggressively heated, and head toward the back of the establishment. If the main room was a sensory assault, the passageways are a test of your claustrophobia. You are now entering the arteries of this architectural beast, and let me tell you, the cholesterol levels are high. These corridors weren't so much designed as they were allowed to happen. You step into a hallway that is aggressively narrow. In modern construction, we have building codes that mandate minimum widths for fire safety and wheelchair accessibility. Here, the only building code seems to be, can a malnourished person fit through sideways? You find yourself turning your shoulders just to navigate the space, your rough woolen tunic brushing against the walls. And speaking of the walls, try not to touch them too much. They are made of wattle and daub, a woven wooden lattice covered in a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. It's an effective insulator, sure, but it means you are literally walking inside a dried compost heap. The atmosphere in these passageways shifts. The roar of the common room muffles into a dull, thumping bass line behind you, replaced by a more intimate, unsettling silence. The air here is thick, static, and heavy. It feels like it hasn't moved since the previous king died. You breathe in, and the air has a texture to it. It's thick enough to chew. It tastes of dust, old damp wood, and that pervasive, inescapable scent of regret. It's the smell of a tavern that has given up on its dreams and settled for a life of petty crime and bad decisions. It is darker here, too. The grease-fed candles are fewer and farther between, sputtering in iron sconces that look like they've been rusting since the Roman Empire fell. The shadows they cast are long and erratic, stretching down the corridor like grasping fingers. The floor beneath your boots is uneven timber, warped by years of humidity and shifting foundations. Every third step you take elicits a groan from the wood, a loud, protesting creak that announces your presence to everyone in a 50-foot radius. It is the original anti-stalking technology. You cannot sneak around this building. As you trudge deeper into the belly of the beast, you realize the layout makes zero sense. There are sudden steps up, unexpected steps down, and corners that turn at sharp, non-Euclidean angles. It's like a funhouse designed by a drunk carpenter. You almost trip over a random beam that cuts across the floor for no apparent reason, a structural afterthought that has probably broken more toes than any war in history. This chaotic architecture is actually a great example of mainstream historical reality in medieval urban planning. In crowded cities, land was taxed by street frontage, so buildings were often narrow at the bottom and flared out as they went up. This is called jettying. But inside, it meant maximizing every inch of internal volume, resulting in a rabbit warren of subdivided rooms and twisting corridors. It's efficiency over comfort, profit over sanity. The vibe is distinctly feverish dream. The walls seem to lean in on you, distorting your perspective. You pass doors that don't quite fit their frames, leaving gaps at the top or bottom where light and sound bleed through. Through one gap, you hear a low murmur of prayer. Through another, the rhythmic thud of a boot hitting a wall. The distinction between private and public space here is practically non-existent. It feels less like a hotel and more like a hive, where every cell is buzzing with its own peculiar drama. There is a palpable sense of foulness here that rivals a military camp. In a camp, at least you have the open air to disperse the stench. Here, the smells are trapped. You catch a whiff of something sharp, ammonia. It's likely a chamber pot that hasn't been emptied, sitting just on the other side of a thin plaster wall. Hygiene in these places is a constant battle against entropy, and entropy is currently winning 5-0. You might notice something odd about the layout as you go deeper. There are no clear fire exits. In fact, the entire building is what modern inspectors would call a creative fire hazard. The timber is old and dry, the rushes on the floor are flammable tinder, and open flames are everywhere. It creates a low-level background anxiety, a primal part of your brain whispering, if a candle falls over, we are toast. And you would be right. Medieval cities burned down with alarming regularity, and looking at this hallway, which is essentially a wind tunnel made of kindling, you understand why. Here is a quirky little tidbit for you. In some of these establishments, the walls between cheaper rooms weren't even solid wattle and daub. They were just heavy blankets or stretched canvas painted to look like wood. So, if you lean too hard against a partition as to steady yourself, you might fall right through into a stranger's lap. It gives a whole new meaning to breaking the fourth wall. It turns the entire floor into a performance art piece where boundaries are merely suggestions. As you navigate this labyrinth, you feel the weight of the atmosphere of regret mentioned earlier. It's not just a poetic turn of phrase, it's a mood. The lighting, the smell, the claustrophobia, it all combines to create a space that feels heavy. It's the architectural equivalent of a hangover. You get the sense that people don't come back here to find themselves. They come here to lose themselves, to disappear into the smoke and the shadows for a few hours. Historians still argue whether the layout of these buildings was intentionally confusing to deter law enforcement and angry spouses, or if it was simply the result of organic, unplanned growth over decades. Was the maze-like structure a security feature, a way to slow down a raid? Or was it just that the owner added a room here and a hallway there whenever they had a spare pile of lumber? Standing in this crooked corridor, staring at a door that is only 4 feet tall, you're inclined to believe it's just pure, unadulterated chaos. The passageway finally opens up slightly, revealing a landing that serves as a junction for the upper rooms. The floor here lists heavily to the left, giving you the sensation of being on a ship at sea. The air is slightly cooler here, drafty from the poorly sealed windows, but it still carries that heavy, greasy perfume. You are deep inside now. You have left the world of the street, the world of the church and the market, and you are fully immersed in the brothel's ecosystem. It is a place of shadows and whispers. You run your hand along a wooden beam, splintery, rough-hewn oak that has been polished smooth in spots by centuries of hands steadying themselves. Just like you are now, you are touching the same wood that soldiers touched before heading to Agincourt, that merchants touched before losing their fortunes. It grounds you in the timeline. You are just another ghost passing through this hallway of bad decisions. The narrowness of the space forces a kind of intimacy with the building itself. You can't ignore it. You have to negotiate with it. You have to duck under the low lintels and step over the warped floorboards. The building demands your attention. It is a hostile environment, yes, but it is also strangely enclosing. It wraps around you like a dirty blanket. You are safe from the wind and the rain, even if you are currently inhaling the fumes of a tallow candle that smells like burning mutton fat. You pause for a moment in the corridor, listening. The sounds of the house settle around you, the creaks, the murmurs, the distant laughter. It's a symphony of urban life compressed into a wooden box. This is the architecture of the medieval underbelly, cramped, dark, smelly, and vibrantly, undeniably alive. You take a breath, holding the thick air in your lungs, and prepare to find the room that has been assigned to you. If the hallway is this bad, one can only imagine what the luxury accommodation looks like. You push open the door to your designated room, a term I use loosely, as cell or closet would be geometrically more accurate, and step inside. If the hallway was a lesson in claustrophobia, this room is a masterclass in minimalist suffering. You have officially arrived in your luxury suite. In a modern hotel, you might look for the minibar or the Wi-Fi password. Here, you find yourself looking for an exit strategy and a tetanus shot. The first thing that strikes you is the interior design philosophy, which can best be described as panic at the flea market. The room is furnished with a collection of mismatched stoneware that looks like a creative fire hazard waiting to happen. There is a pitcher in the corner made of heavy gray clay that seems to be sweating, likely leaking whatever liquid was last inside it. Next to it sits a bowl that has clearly been broken and glued back together with something that looks suspiciously like pine, resin, and hope. It's an aesthetic that modern designers might call eclectic or rustic chic, but here it just means the owner scavenged these items from the refuse pile behind a more successful tavern. On a rickety wooden stool, one leg noticeably shorter than the others, shimmed with a piece of slate, sits your lighting for the evening. It's a single tallow candle stuck into the neck of a broken wine bottle. The wax has melted down the sides in globs that look like solidified stalactites. This precarious setup is placed alarmingly close to the wall, which, as we've established, is made of dry wood and straw. The entire room is essentially a tinderbox. If you sneeze too hard in the direction of that candle, the headlines tomorrow will read, "Local Idiot Burns Down District." It is a creative fire hazard in the truest sense. It requires a level of imagination to see how anyone thought this was safe. But the centerpiece of the room, the pièce de résistance, is the bed. In the medieval period, a bed was often the most expensive item a family owned. Wealthy people would mention their beds in their wills, leaving them to their favorite children like we might leave a house or a car. This is not one of those beds. This is not a bed that anyone would fight over in probate court. This is a bed you would pay someone to take away. It is a pallet pushed into the corner to maximize floor space, of which there is almost none. There is no frame, no box spring, and certainly no memory foam. The mattress is a simple sack made of coarse hemp cloth stuffed with straw. And when I say straw, don't picture the clean golden hay you see in movies. Picture old, gray, dusty stalks that have been compressed by the weight of 1,000 weary travelers before you. You sit down on it, and the sound is immediate and alarming. It is crispy. It crunches loudly, like you are sitting on a giant bag of stale corn chips. Every movement you make generates a cacophony of rustling and snapping. It is the least stealthy piece of furniture ever invented. If you turn over in your sleep, it sounds like you are marching through a dry forest in autumn. The texture is equally punishing. The hemp sack is worn thin in places, and the sharp ends of the straw poke through the fabric like tiny, vengeful needles. It's less of a mattress and more of an acupuncture session you didn't consent to. You run your hand across the surface, feeling the lumps and valleys. It's a topographical map of discomfort. There is a massive depression in the center where the straw has been pulverized into dust, creating a sort of gravity well that will inevitably suck you into the middle of the bed during the night. This mattress feels ancient. You suspect the straw inside hasn't been changed since the invention of the longbow. There are stains on the fabric, dark, ominous patches that could be wine, ale, or blood. It has the distinct aura of an object that is older than the 100 Years' War. It has seen things. It has absorbed the sweat of soldiers, the tears of merchants, and the drool of drunkards for generations. It holds history in its fibers, specifically the gross parts of history. Here is a mainstream historical fact to ground you in this misery. In the Middle Ages, the quality of your bed was a direct reflection of your social standing. Kings slept on feather beds encased in fine linen. Peasants slept on straw pallets like this one. But even peasants would usually empty the old straw and put in fresh stuff once a year, usually around harvest time. This brothel, however, operates on a different schedule, which appears to be never. You are sleeping on a geological layer of organic matter. There is a quirky tidbit about medieval bed maintenance that feels relevant as you try to flatten a particularly sharp lump. People used a tool called a bedstaff, a wooden stick, to beat the mattress and smooth out the lumps before sleep. It was also used to keep the bedding from sliding off. Looking around the room, you don't see a bedstaff. You see a heavy rock that might be used for the same purpose, or perhaps for self-defense. You give the mattress a few tentative punches with your fist, trying to redistribute the straw, but it's like punching a bag of gravel. The lumps are permanent. They are structural. As you contemplate lying down on this torture device, you remember that sleep patterns were different back then. Historians still argue whether biphasic sleep was the universal standard, the idea that people slept in 2 shifts with a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night to pray, read, or chat. Standing here, staring at this lumpy sack, you realize that biphasic sleep might not have been a cultural choice, but a physical necessity. No one could possibly stay asleep on this thing for 8 consecutive hours without their spine fusing into a question mark. You will likely wake up, not to pray, but to rotate your body to a patch of straw that hasn't yet bruised your ribs. The wounds on the mattress, the rips and tears in the fabric, reveal the dusty contents inside. A puff of fine gray powder rises into the air as you sit, dancing in the candlelight. You inhale, and your lungs fill with the musk of ancient grain and microscopic mites. It smells earthy, musty, and slightly sweet, like a barn that has been sealed shut for a century. It's the smell of agricultural decay brought indoors. You try to arrange the pillows, which are really just smaller sacks stuffed with slightly less abrasive straw. They are hard and unyielding, more like sandbags used for flood control than headrests. You stack them against the wall, trying to create a semblance of comfort, but they just slide down, defeated by gravity and apathy. The room feels small, the air is still, and the candle flickers, casting wild shadows against the wattle and daub walls. You are surrounded by mismatched stoneware and a mattress that sounds like a bowl of cereal. It is a luxury only in the sense that you have a door you can close, though the latch is broken and the hinges are loose. You are protected from the rain, but you are intimately exposed to the scratchy, dusty reality of medieval bedding. This is your sanctuary, a fire trap filled with broken pottery and a bed that actively hates you. You carefully blow out the candle because you really don't want to die in a fire tonight, and the room plunges into a darkness so thick it feels heavy. You lie back, the straw crunching deafeningly under your weight, and stare up into the invisible ceiling, wondering if the 100 Years' War felt as long as this night is going to be. As you lie there in the suffocating darkness, trying to find a position where the straw mattress doesn't actively puncture your lung, you become aware of a shifting weight near your feet. It's a subtle movement at first, the kind you might dismiss as a muscle spasm or a hallucination brought on by the fumes of the tallow candle. But then, the weight settles. It is warm, heavy, and vibrates with a low, rhythmic rumble. You freeze. In a modern hotel, feeling something crawl into bed with you is cause for immediate panic and a lawsuit. Here, in this medieval establishment, it just means you have met the roommates. You are not sleeping alone tonight. Privacy, like hygiene, is a concept that hasn't quite made it to this century yet. You are sharing this luxury suite with a motley crew of permanent residents who view you less as a paying guest and more as a large bioorganic space heater. First, let's talk about the cats. There are 2 of them, though in the dark, they feel like a singular, multi-limbed entity. These are not the fluffy, pampered tabbies of Instagram who have their own filtered water fountains and dietary restrictions. These are medieval cats. They are small, wiry, and built like tanks made of hate and sinew. One of them, whom you might affectionately call Scraps, has a notch in his ear that looks like it was removed by a very precise pair of tailoring shears. The other, let's call her Duchess, has a coat of fur so matted it serves as natural armor against the elements. They don't ask for permission to board the bed, they simply annex it. They treat your legs as conquered territory, curling up in the valleys of the straw mattress that you were hoping to use for your own comfort. If you try to move your leg, Scraps digs his claws in, just enough to pierce the wool of your hose, a gentle reminder that he is the captain now. There is a mainstream historical fact worth noting here. In the Middle Ages, cats were often viewed with suspicion by the church, sometimes associated with witchcraft or heresy. However, in a place like a brothel or a grain store, they were essential employees. They were the biological pest control unit. So, while having them sleep on your face is annoying, you should technically be grateful. They are the only thing standing between you and the armies of vermin living in the walls. They are the thin, furry line of defense. Speaking of vermin, there is a distinct scuttling sound coming from the corner where you left your boots. This brings us to your 3rd roommate, the dull rat. Now, you might be picturing a terrifying, disease-ridden monster rat, the kind that carries the Black Death on its back, like a backpacker carrying a sleeping bag. But this rat is different. He is remarkably average. He is large, brown, and moves with a lethargic confidence that suggests he has tenure. We call him the dull rat because he seems entirely unimpressed by your presence. He doesn't skitter away in fear when you cough. He just pauses, looks at you with beady, bored eyes, and continues chewing on the leather strap of your sandal. He is a fixture of the room, like the broken pitcher or the drafty window. In the hierarchy of this room, you are actually below the rat. The rat lives here. You are just passing through. He knows where the good crumbs are, He knows which floorboards are loose. He is the oldest tenant in the building, and he treats the space with the casual arrogance of a frat brother who refuses to do the dishes. But the true king of the room, the roommate that truly defies explanation, is perched on the rafters directly above your head. It is an ancient, grumpy rooster. You might be asking, why is there farm poultry in the bedroom? It's a valid question. In the medieval period, livestock theft was a genuine concern. If you left your prize rooster outside in the coop, he might end up in a neighbor's pot by morning. So, valuable animals were often brought indoors for safekeeping. This rooster, however, seems to be here for reasons beyond security. He acts like the supervisor. He is old. His feathers are ragged, fading from a vibrant red to a dusty, aggressive orange. He shifts on the wooden beam, his talons clicking against the timber, a sound like someone tapping a skeletal finger on a desk, waiting for you to make a mistake. He doesn't crow, he just judges. He stares down at you with one milky eye and one good eye that burns with the intensity of 1,000 suns. This rooster brings a whole new level of awkwardness to the room. Private matters in this space are, as the locals say, a legendary conversation. Imagine trying to undress or count your coins while being intensely scrutinized by a bird that looks like it remembers the fall of Rome. There is no privacy here. You are performing your nightly routine for an audience of two indifferent cats, a bored rat, and a poultry patriarch who seems personally offended by your existence. Historians still argue whether the close proximity of humans and animals in medieval sleeping quarters contributed to stronger immune systems or just a lot of weird respiratory infections. It's the old MacDonald hypothesis of epidemiology. Breathing in the dander of a rooster and the dust of a rat all night certainly does something to your lungs, though strengthening might be a generous word for it. The dynamic in the room is palpable. You are the intruder. The animals have a system. The cats get the warmth, the rat gets the floor scraps, and the rooster gets the penthouse suite in the rafters. You are simply the variable that has disrupted their ecosystem. You can feel the rooster's gaze boring into the top of your head. Every time the straw mattress crunches, the rooster lets out a low, guttural cluck, a sound of pure disapproval. It's like sleeping in the same room as your disappointed grandfather if your grandfather was a bird. There is a quirky tidbit about medieval animal laws that feels relevant as you stare at the rat. In this era, animals could technically be put on trial for crimes. There are records of pigs being tried for murder and rats being subpoenaed for destroying grain. As you watch the dull rat gnaw on the leg of the stool, you wonder if you have legal grounds to sue him for property damage. But looking at his nonchalant chewing, you realize he probably has a better lawyer than you do. He knows the system. The sensory experience of these roommates is overwhelming. The room smells of dry straw, yes, but now you pick up the notes of wet fur, bird dust, and the distinct musk of rodent. It's a barnyard bouquet. The soundscape is a lullaby of scratching, purring, and the occasional thump of the rooster shifting his weight. It's not quiet, but it's rhythmic. It's the sound of life continuing, regardless of your comfort. You try to gently nudge Duchess off your shins to regain some blood flow to your feet. She responds by going completely boneless, effectively doubling her weight, a physics-defying move known to cat owners across all centuries. She begins to purr, a sound like a small diesel engine idling against your leg. It's aggressive relaxation. She is vibrating your tibia. You surrender. You are now a piece of furniture. As the night deepens, the dull rat finishes his snack and scurries across the floor, his claws clicking on the wood. He disappears into a hole in the wattle and daub wall, presumably to file a noise complaint about your breathing. The rooster finally settles down, tucking his head under a ragged wing, though you suspect he is still watching you through his eyelids. You are left alone with your thoughts and the heavy, warm weight of the cats. It's a strange, crowded kind of loneliness. You realize that in the medieval world, solitude is a luxury for the rich or the hermits. For everyone else, life is a communal affair, shared with family, strangers, and yes, the occasional barnyard animal. You are part of the pack now, whether you like it or not. You close your eyes, listening to the purring and the scratching, and try to convince yourself that this is cozy. It's organic. It's artisanal sleeping. It's a nightmare. But as the warmth of the cats seeps through the scratchy wool of the blanket, you have to admit it beats freezing to death. You drift off, watched over by the ancient rooster, a prisoner in your own bed, accepted into the fold of the room's furry and feathered tenants. Deciding that the judgment of the ancient rooster is too much to bear for one evening, you slide out from under the heavy warmth of the cats and creep back out into the corridor. You follow the scent of wood smoke and onions back toward the main common area, drawn by a force of gravity that seems to pull everyone in the building toward a singular point. You are about to meet the center of this universe, the sun around which all these chaotic planets orbit. You are about to meet the madam. If the brothel is a ship sailing through the stormy seas of medieval urban life, she is the captain, the anchor, and the kraken all rolled into one. The locals might call her the mistress of the house, or the abbess of misrule, but make no mistake, she is the real boss. In a world dominated by men, kings, bishops, guild masters, this room belongs entirely to her. She stands behind a heavy oak counter that is scarred with knife marks and ringed with the stains of 1,000 tankards. She is a woman of indeterminate age, somewhere between experienced and ancient. Her physical presence is undeniable. She is built like a siege tower, sturdy, imposing, and designed to withstand heavy bombardment. She wears a dress of dark, practical wool that has been patched so many times it looks like a geological survey map. Around her waist is a heavy leather belt that creaks when she moves, laden with the tools of her trade, a ring of iron keys that jingle like the bells of doom, a pouch of coins that she guards with her life, and, most notably, a sharpened knife. But her primary weapon of choice, the scepter of her kingdom, is currently in her hand. It is a massive iron ladle. She is using it to stir a cauldron of pottage hanging over the hearth fire, but the way she holds it suggests it could easily be repurposed for blunt force trauma. She wields it with an iron grip, stirring the thick, bubbling stew with a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. Clang, scrape, swirl, clang, scrape, swirl. It is the heartbeat of the kitchen. You get the distinct impression that she runs this establishment with this ladle, dispensing both food and justice with the same utensil. Her authority here is absolute. The local town chief or the sheriff might technically have jurisdiction over the district, but inside these timber walls, their laws are mere suggestions. Her word is the only statute that matters. She settles disputes not with a court summons, but with a sharp rap of the ladle on the knuckles or a pointed glare that could curdle milk. She possesses a sharpened knife on her belt, yes, but she rarely needs to draw it. The threat is enough. Her eyes, narrowed and calculating, scan the room with the precision of a hawk spotting a field mouse. Here is a mainstream historical fact to contextualize her power. In many medieval cities, particularly in London's Southwark district, brothels were often owned by men or even religious institutions. The Bishop of Winchester's geese was a common slang term for the women working there. However, the day-to-day management was almost exclusively left to women. These women, often called Flemish vrouws in England due to their frequent origins in the Low Countries, held a unique and powerful status. They were marginalized by polite society, but held immense economic power within their own domain. They were the CEOs of the underworld. The madam's most terrifying attribute, however, is not her ladle or her knife. It is her memory. In a time before spreadsheets, cloud storage, or even reliable paper, she maintains a mental ledger that is terrifyingly accurate. She has an excellent memory for debts. She remembers who ordered the extra flagon of ale 3 weeks ago. She remembers who promised to pay next Tuesday for the last 6 months. She remembers whose coin was clipped, shaved down to steal the silver, and whose face looks a little too similar to the wanted poster in the town square. You watch as a scruffy-looking mercenary approaches the counter, trying to look casual. He mumbles something about a tab. The madam doesn't even look up from her cauldron. She simply recites a list of dates and amounts in a flat, monotone voice, citing his debt down to the last halfpenny. The mercenary pales, shrinks about 3 inches in height, and scurries away to find some coins. It is a display of bureaucratic dominance that is awe-inspiring to witness. Historians still argue whether these women were empowered entrepreneurs navigating a patriarchal system, or if they were merely another layer of exploitation caught in the gears of a brutal economy. Was the madam a liberated woman running her own destiny, or was she just the jailer for the women under her roof? Standing here, watching her verbally dismantle a drunkard with a single sentence, she certainly doesn't look like a victim. She looks like the only person in the room who knows exactly what is going on. There is a quirky tidbit about her role that adds to the surreal nature of the scene. In some regions, the madam was also responsible for enforcing the sumptuary laws within her house, rules about what people could wear. If a girl's dress was too fancy or resembled that of a noblewoman too closely, the madam had to confiscate it. This makes her part landlady, part bouncer, and part draconian fashion police. She eyes your tunic with a critical gaze, and you feel a sudden urge to apologize for the quality of your stitching. Her management style involves a lot of delegation, mostly screamed across the room. She barks orders at the serving girls, the pot boys, and the bouncer, whom we will meet later. Her voice cuts through the din of the tavern like a foghorn. Yet, when she speaks to a paying customer who is well behaved, her voice drops to a silky, dangerous purr. It's a customer service voice that says, "I will take your money, but I will also break your fingers if you smash my pottery." The atmosphere around her is thick with respect, or perhaps just fear. The space immediately in front of her counter is the only part of the room that isn't crowded. It's a buffer zone, a demilitarized zone. People approach it only when necessary. You stand at the edge of this zone, watching her work. She grabs a rough clay bowl, dips the iron ladle into the cauldron, and slaps a serving of gray stew into it with a wet thwack. She slides it across the counter to a waiting patron without spilling a drop. It is a motion of pure efficiency. She is also the keeper of the grapevine. Because everyone passes through her domain, soldiers, merchants, priests in disguise, she knows everything. She knows which ships are docking tomorrow, which lord is having an affair, and which merchant is secretly bankrupt. Information is a currency here, often more stable than the debased silver coins in her pouch. If you wanted to know the real news of the city, you wouldn't go to the town crier. You would buy the madam a drink. Not that she would drink it with you. She never drinks on the job. She watches. As you observe her, you notice her hands. They are red, chapped, and strong. These are hands that have scrubbed floors, counted coins, and thrown grown men out into the mud. They are the hands of a survivor. In the feverish dream of the brothel, she is the cold splash of reality. She is the checkout time. She is the final bill. You realize that while the king might rule the land, and the bishop might rule the soul, the madam rules the night. She controls the heat, the food, the drink, and the bed you are trying to sleep in. She holds the keys to the kingdom, quite literally, on that jingling belt. She catches you staring. She stops stirring the pot. The ladle dripping thick brown liquid back into the fire. She fixes you with a look that is neither friendly nor hostile. It is simply appraising. She is calculating your net worth, your potential for causing trouble, and the likelihood of you paying your bill. You quickly look away, pretending to be fascinated by a stain on the wall. You do not want to end up on the wrong side of that iron ladle. The noise of the room rises and falls, but she remains constant, a monolith of wool and will. She is the Iron Lady, long before the term was invented. As you retreat back toward the shadows of the hallway, you feel a strange sense of comfort, knowing she is there. In a place this chaotic, it is good to know that someone is in charge, even if that someone is terrifying. Turning away from the madam's terrifying gaze, you drift toward a heavy timber support beam near the entrance. Nailed to the wood with rusted iron spikes is a piece of parchment that looks like it has survived a flood, a fire, and possibly a siege. It is yellowed, curling at the edges, and stained with unidentifiable brown splotches that you sincerely hope are just gravy. This is the house constitution. This is the code of conduct. You lean in, squinting in the flickering candlelight to decipher the text. The handwriting is aggressive, jagged, and thick, scrawled in an ink that looks suspiciously like it was mixed with soot and vinegar. It wasn't written by a scribe. It was written by someone who holds a quill the same way they hold a dagger, with intent to do harm. These are the rules. In a modern hotel, you get a laminated binder telling you the Wi-Fi password and how to operate the coffee machine. Here, you get a list of commandments designed to keep you alive and the building standing. The list is long, rambling, and oddly specific, suggesting that every single rule was written immediately after a very specific, very disastrous incident occurred. The first rule, written in the largest letters at the top, is simple: no fighting inside. It seems like common sense, but in the medieval world, violence is often just a form of aggressive communication. Men wear swords as fashion accessories. Daggers are used for everything from cutting meat to settling arguments about dice. The rule specifies, in smaller, angrier letters underneath, take it to the street. The mud is free. The furniture is not. This rule exists for a practical reason. The furniture in this establishment, the stools, the benches, the tables, is fragile. It's mismatched stoneware and rotting wood. If a brawl breaks out, the collateral damage eats directly into the madam's profit margin. She doesn't care if you want to stab the guy who insulted your boots. She just cares if you bleed on her floor rushes. The street outside, with its open sewers and mud, is the designated PvP, player versus player, zone. Inside, it is strictly a safe zone, or at least a ceasefire zone. There is a mainstream historical fact here that gives weight to this rule. Medieval brothels, especially the licensed ones in places like Southwark, were actually subject to strict royal ordinances, like the ordinances of 1161 issued by Henry II. These laws explicitly forbade brothel keepers from harboring men who were breaching the peace or allowing weapons to be drawn inside. So, this parchment isn't just the madam's whim, it's her compliance with federal law to keep her license. If the constables raid the place and find a corpse in the corner, she gets shut down. The second rule is equally prominent: no credit. This one is underlined 3 times. The medieval economy is often a complex web of debt and barter, but here the policy is cash on the barrelhead. The text elaborates. We do not accept promises, prayers, or "my father is a lord" as payment. In a world without credit scores or digital banking, trust is low. Giving credit is a great way to go bankrupt. You might hear the phrase "chalk it up" in taverns, referring to writing a debt on a slate chalkboard to be paid later. Here, the slate doesn't exist. The madam knows that a man who has had too much weak beer and sensory overload is not a reliable debtor. He might be dead of the plague by Tuesday, or he might simply board a ship to Calais and never return. Historians still argue about the functional literacy of the patrons in these establishments. Could the average soldier, peasant, or wayward apprentice actually read this angry scrawl? Some scholars suggest that these signs were largely symbolic, a talisman of authority rather than a functional document. Others argue that urban literacy was higher than we assume. Standing here, watching a drunken sailor squint at the parchment and then immediately try to haggle for a drink on credit, you suspect the symbolic theory might hold some weight. The rule is likely enforced verbally, usually accompanied by the tapping of that iron ladle. The third rule is a direct attack on the business model of the cheapskate: no free samples. This applies to everything: the ale, the pottage, and the companionship. There is no "try before you buy" here. The rule scrawled on the parchment is phrased with a brutal, dry wit. Curiosity costs a penny, satisfaction costs 2. It's a reminder that this is a commercial enterprise, not a charity. The passengers and tourists who come in just to gawk at the spiritual health of the brothel are tolerated only as long as they buy a bowl of that mysterious stew. Loitering is a taxable offense. Then there is the fourth rule, which feels strangely specific and deeply personal to the management. No singing after midnight. You might think this is about maintaining a peaceful sleeping environment, but looking around at the soldiers shouting and the dice rattling, you realize peace is not the goal. This is about quality control. Drunken medieval singing is a sonic weapon. It's off-key, loud, and usually involves repetitive ballads about milkmaids or wars that ended 50 years ago. There is a quirky tidbit of history related to this. In many medieval towns, the curfew bell would ring at night. The word comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. It was a signal to dampen your hearth fires to prevent the city from burning down, but it also signaled the end of the social night. While the brothel operates in the legal gray area after curfew, the no singing rule is likely an attempt to avoid drawing the attention of the night watch. If the neighbors hear a chorus of 50 drunk men singing "The Miller's Daughter" at 2 a.m., the authorities might decide to inspect the premises, and nobody wants that. The list goes on, spiraling into smaller, more bizarre prohibitions that hint at the never-ending game of hide and seek the establishment plays with chaos. Do not feed the dog human food. He prefers bones. A reference to Brutus, no doubt. No gambling with loaded dice. Violators will be forced to eat them. Do not discuss theology with the rooster. He is a pagan. Okay, you might have imagined that one, but the sentiment is there. The parchment itself smells. It has absorbed the ambient atmosphere of the room, smoke, grease, and damp wool. It is a sensory archive of the house rules. As you read it, you notice a large dark stain near the bottom where someone likely threw a tankard at the rules in protest. The parchment is buckled and warped there, a physical record of a customer service complaint. The existence of these rules creates a strange psychological boundary. This place feels lawless, a darkest hell, and yet it is governed by a strict, if somewhat arbitrary code. It's a microcosm of feudal society. There is a ruler, the madam, a set of laws, the parchment, and a severe punishment for treason, eviction, or a beating. You realize that the fighting outside rule explains the noise you heard earlier from the street. The scuffle in the mud was just compliant patrons following the SOP, standard operating procedure. The system works. The font size gets smaller and smaller as the list goes down, until the final rules are just angry scribbles at the bottom of the skin. They cover the minutiae of daily life: where to spit, the floor; where to vomit, the bucket, not the floor; and the penalty for stealing candles, loss of a finger, or perhaps just a hefty fine. It's a fascinating document. In a way, it's more honest than the Magna Carta. It doesn't promise justice or liberty. It promises a very specific transactional order. You pay, you stay, you don't break the chairs. It's the social contract of the gutter. As you finish reading, a serving girl rushes past you, balancing 3 tankards of ale. She brushes against the pillar, and the parchment rustles dryly, like dead leaves. You look at her, then back at the rule about no credit. She catches the eye of a patron who is digging through his empty pockets with a look of desperation. She shakes her head once, a sharp, decisive movement. The rule is enforced. The written word on the wall has power, backed by the invisible threat of the madam's memory and the very visible threat of the bouncer. You step back from the pillar, having memorized the commandments. No fighting, no credit, no singing. You can survive this. You just have to navigate the narrow passageways of these regulations without getting stuck. You decide to keep your voice down and your coins visible. It's the only way to survive the night in a place where the rules are written in soot and the ink never quite dries. After memorizing the house rules and realizing that singing is a punishable offense, you become acutely aware of another pressing issue. You smell, and in a place that smells like a burning wig factory, that is saying something. The layers of road dust, horse sweat, and the ambient grease of the common room have formed a sort of crust on your skin. You decide to brave the establishment's hygiene facilities. You are about to experience the rusty tub. You navigate through a back door that hangs off its hinges like a loose tooth and step out into a small, enclosed courtyard. The air here is colder, biting at your exposed face, and smells of wet earth and rotting vegetable peels. In the center of this mud-slicked patio sits the amenity you have been seeking. In a modern hotel, this would be the spa and wellness center. Here, it is a single, large wooden tub banded with rusting iron hoops, sitting forlornly in the drizzle. It looks less like a place for cleansing and more like something you'd use to pickle a large shark. The wood is dark, slimy with algae, and warped from years of exposure to the elements. Steam rises from it in lazy, erratic wisps, disappearing into the gloom. Standing next to the tub is a bath attendant, a sullen teenager whose job description appears to be stare at the water and grumble. You approach the tub and look inside. This is where you make your first mistake. The water is complex. In the modern world, we expect bathwater to be transparent, perhaps with a nice blue tint. This water is opaque. It is a murky, gray-brown soup that defies the laws of optics. It has a texture. There is a layer of scum floating on the surface that looks like a topographical map of a swamp. Here is the terrifying reality of the situation. Heating water in the medieval period is incredibly labor-intensive and expensive. Wood costs money. Hauling buckets of water from the river or well costs calories. Therefore, the water in this tub is not changed between baths. It is a communal resource. It is a human tea that has been steeping all night. You are not the first person to get in, and you certainly aren't the second. You are likely the 15th person to dip your body into this thermal experiment. You hesitate. The attendant looks at you, taps a small hourglass, and says, "Water's warm. Get in or get out." It's not an invitation, it's a threat. Before you submerge yourself in the community broth, there is the matter of soap. In your mind, you might be picturing a nice bar of Dove or some artisanal lavender body wash. Forget that. Soap in this era is a unique and heavily guarded commodity. It is made from rendered animal fat, tallow, mixed with wood ash, lye. It is caustic, it smells like bacon, and it is soft, like a paste. The attendant holds a small pot of this precious substance. He does not hand it to you. He dips 2 fingers into the pot, scoops out a tiny, translucent glob, and flicks it onto your shoulder. That is it. That is your ration. The prompt calls this the one-spot spray, a single, miserly application applied to exactly one spot on your body. You have to decide strategically where that spot is. Do you wash your face, your armpits, your feet? You have to prioritize your hygiene zones like a general allocating troops on a battlefield. You furiously scrub that one spot, hoping the cleanliness will somehow migrate to the rest of your body via osmosis. You climb into the tub. The wood is slippery, coated in a biofilm that feels like the skin of a salamander. You lower yourself into the liquid. It is warm, which is nice, but it feels heavy. The water clings to you. As you sit there, submerged up to your chest, you try not to think about the ingredients of the bathwater. It is a cocktail of every soldier, merchant, and traveler who passed through before you. You are literally soaking in the history of the town. There is a mainstream historical fact here that is important to remember. Despite the popular myth that medieval people never bathed, public bathhouses, often called stews, like this place, were incredibly popular in the 12th to 15th centuries. People went there to socialize, eat, and even conduct business in the tubs. In some German cities, it was common to eat a full meal on a floating board while soaking. However, this popularity created a paradox. The more popular the bath, the dirtier the water. Historians still argue about the exact tipping point when public bathing went from social necessity to moral hazard. Some suggest it was the arrival of syphilis in the late 15th century that finally killed the bathhouse culture, terrifying people into thinking that water opened the pores to disease. Others argue it was the Reformation, which viewed the naked socializing in these stews as sinful. Standing here, waist-deep in gray sludge, you feel like you are right on that tipping point. You can feel the bacteria debating your immune system in real time. The sensory experience is overwhelming. The steam smells of wet wool, lye soap, and damp dog. The tub itself has a metallic tang from the rusty iron hoops. When you move your legs, you kick something at the bottom of the tub. Is it a sponge, a lost boot, a drowning rat? You decide not to investigate. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. The bath attendant watches you like a hawk. You are renminting the water, not owning it. If you take too long, he will bang on the side of the tub with a wooden ladle. The madam's influence is everywhere. You are on the clock. This is speed bathing. You grab a rough rag that hangs off the side of the tub, a communal rag, obviously, and begin to scrub. The rag is stiff and scratchy, exfoliating your skin with the gentleness of sandpaper. It removes the dirt, sure, but it also removes the first 2 layers of your epidermis. As you soak, you realize that this rusty tub is actually a great equalizer. In the tub, everyone is just a naked person in dirty water. The soldier's armor is on the ground. The merchant's velvet robes are on a peg. For 10 minutes, the class system is suspended in a solution of warm, gray slime. Quirky tidbit time. Medieval doctors often had very specific and often contradictory advice about bathing. Some believed it helped digestion, others thought it weakened the body. But a common belief was that you should not bathe on an empty stomach, or you might faint. Looking at the opaque water, you think fainting might actually be a blessing. It would save you from having to consciously experience the rest of the bath. The water is cooling down rapidly. The heat retention properties of a rusty wooden tub in a drafty courtyard are not great. The warm soup is turning into gazpacho. You start to shiver, which is a dangerous activity because it makes the water slosh around, potentially splashing into your mouth. You clamp your lips shut. You would rather die of thirst than taste a single drop of this liquid. You decide you are as clean as you are going to get. You have used your one-spot spray of soap, you have scraped off the road dust, and you have marinated in the community broth for the allotted time. You stand up, the water sluicing off you in heavy, gray sheets. You feel lighter in the sense that large chunks of mud are gone, but you also feel coated in a thin, invisible film of otherness. You step out onto the muddy stones of the courtyard. The cold air hits your wet skin like a slap. There are no fluffy white towels here. You dry yourself with your own tunic, or if you are lucky, a piece of linen that feels like a sail from a shipwreck. You are shivering, your teeth chattering, your skin pink from the heat and the scrubbing. As you dress, putting your dirty clothes back onto your semi-clean body, you realize the futility of the exercise. You are clean for approximately 30 seconds. The moment you walk back into the smoky, soot-filled common room, the cycle begins again. But for now, you have survived the rusty tub. You have navigated the hygiene protocols. You have shared a bath with the ghost of every patron from the last week. You look back at the tub. The water settles, the scum reforming on the surface, waiting for the next victim. The attendant stirs it slightly with a stick, not to clean it, but just to keep the sediment from hardening. It is a perpetual stew. You hurry back inside, eager for the warmth of the fire, even if it smells like burning fat. You have conquered the bath. You are now technically, legally, clean, or at least you are wet and smell slightly less like a horse. In the medieval world, that is a victory. You stand shivering in the damp air of the courtyard, or perhaps back in the drafty corner of the room, faced with the complex engineering project that is getting dressed. In the modern world, dressing is a thoughtless act. You pull on a t-shirt, zip up a pair of jeans, and you are ready for the day. It takes 30 seconds. Here, in the medieval period, getting dressed is a negotiation between you, several layers of reluctant fabric, and a series of knots that defy the laws of physics. You are not wearing silk. Silk is for the people who own the brothel, or the people who tax the brothel. You are wearing the fabrics of the people, linen and wool. And let me tell you, this isn't the high thread count Egyptian cotton you buy at a department store sale. This is disastrous fashion at its finest. First comes the linen. This is your base layer, your chemise or shirt. It is the only thing standing between your sensitive skin and the abrasive wool that follows. The linen here is sturdy. It has the texture of a canvas sack that was once used to transport turnips. It's thick, slightly yellowed from age and improper washing, and stiff. When you pull it over your head, it exfoliates your face for the second time tonight. There is a mainstream historical fact that explains the stiffness. Medieval laundry was a brutal process. Clothes were boiled in cauldrons with lye, ash, and water, and often bleached using urine. Yes, urine, because the ammonia acted as a cleaning agent. So, as you pull that tunic down, you are wrapping yourself in a garment that has been chemically treated with the waste products of the village. It's eco-friendly in the most disturbing way possible. Next comes the wool. You pull on your outer tunic, a heavy, dense garment that weighs about as much as a small child. This wool is not the soft, processed merino you might be used to. This is raw, scratchy. I can still smell the sheep wool. It is thick enough to stop a weak arrow and itchy enough to drive a Zen monk to violence. It smells of wet animal, lanolin, and the wood smoke of 100 hearths. It doesn't drape, it hangs. It creates a silhouette that says, I am shaped like a bell, and I am sad about it. Now, we must address the structural integrity of your outfit. In the modern world, we rely on the miraculous technology known as the button. Buttons exist in this era, but they are rare, expensive, and usually reserved for high fashion. For a regular patron in a place like this, buttons are a futuristic dream. Instead, you have points. Points are laces, strings with metal tips, aglets, that you use to tie your clothes together. You are essentially trussing yourself like a holiday turkey. You have to thread these laces through eyelets to attach your hose to your belt, your tunic to your throat, and your soul to your body. The problem is, these ties are made of leather or braided wool, and they have a mind of their own. They snap, they fray, and most frequently, they get tangled into knots that would make Alexander the Great weep. You spend 10 minutes just trying to tie your leggings to your waist so they don't fall down around your ankles while you walk. It is a precarious system. If one knot slips, you suffer a catastrophic wardrobe malfunction. You are constantly hiking things up, retying bows, and checking your structural integrity. It's not fashion, it's rigging a sailboat that happens to be your pants. Your ensemble is a visual patchwork of disastrous fashion. Nothing matches. Your tunic is a faded russet, a reddish brown made from madder root. Your hose are a dull mustard yellow, and your hood is a shade of green that suggests algae. And then there are the patches. Your clothes are a history map of your failures. There is a patch on the elbow from where you leaned on a rough table, a patch on the knee from where you knelt in the mud, a patch on the hem where a dog chewed it. The patches don't match the original fabric. They are scraps of whatever was available, a piece of gray blanket, a strip of old sack. You look less like a person and more like a quilt that gave up on life. Historians still argue about the concept of fashion for the lower classes. Did they care about aesthetics, or was it purely functional? Some evidence suggests that even the poorest peasants tried to emulate the silhouettes of the rich, modifying their tunics to be tighter or shorter as trends changed. Standing here, trying to align a patch so it doesn't look completely ridiculous, you realize that caring is a strong word. You are mostly just trying to cover your nudity with materials that don't actively hurt you. But the true defining feature of your outfit, the accessory that completes the look, is the wildlife. You are not wearing this wool alone. You have passengers. Lice are considered a real uniform here. They are not an infestation. They are a standard feature of the clothing. In the seams of your heavy wool tunic, in the warm, dark folds of your hose, they live. They are the seam squirrels, the constant companions of the medieval traveler. You feel a tickle on your shoulder blade, a spot you cannot reach because your wool tunic is too tight in the armpits. It is a louse, going for a morning stroll. You don't even panic. You just do the medieval shimmy, rubbing your back against the timber wall like a bear scratching an itch. It is a socially acceptable dance move. Everyone does it. Look around the common room. The merchant is scratching his thigh. The soldier is scratching his neck. It is a synchronized ballet of itchiness. There is a quirky tidbit about lice that is strangely fascinating. In this era, having lice was sometimes seen as a sign of holiness for saints and monks, a mortification of the flesh. But for you, it's just annoying. You might try to pick them out, a social activity known as nitpicking, which is where the term comes from, but it's a losing battle. The wool is their fortress. They have the high ground. Then there is the issue of hose. These are not pants. They are two separate fabric tubes, one for each leg, that you pull up into your belt. There is no crotch seam connecting them in the middle, though usually you'd wear linen braids or boxers underneath. This design choice means that if your belt slips or a point breaks, you lose one leg of your pants. It slides down, bunching around your knee, leaving you looking like you are melting. The fit is terrible. Wool is cut on the bias, diagonally, to give it a little stretch, but it's not spandex. It bags at the knees. It sags at the rear. You look like you are wearing the skin of a very loose elephant. You spend half your time pulling up your hose and the other half tugging down your tunic to cover the gaps. It is a constant fidget. As you finish dressing, you tie a leather belt around your waist. This is the most functional part of your outfit. It holds your purse, hidden carefully, your knife for eating, and it literally holds your pants up. You pull it tight, creating a waist where there isn't one, compressing the layers of linen and wool into a bundle. You look at yourself in the reflection of the dark window. You see a lumpy, mismatched figure. You look like a potato wrapped in scraps. The colors are drab, the texture is rough, and you are vibrating slightly from the desire to scratch 3 different places at once. This is the reality of the era. No zippers to zip, no Velcro to stick. Just knots, heavy fabric, and the smell of wet sheep. You feel armored in a way. The layers protect you from the cold draft of the brothel, from the sharp edges of the furniture, and to some degree from the world. You are encased in a cocoon of disastrous fashion. You take a deep breath, inhaling the scent of your own damp wool, a smell that will follow you for the rest of your life, and prepare to face the public. You are dressed, you are itchy, You are a walking ecosystem of fabric and parasites, and in this feverish dream of a building, you fit right in. Having successfully navigated the treacherous waters of the bathtub and wrestled your way into your scratchy woolen armor, you now face the next great survival challenge of the evening, dinner. You are hungry, which is a dangerous state of mind in a medieval brothel. It lowers your inhibitions and makes you willing to put things in your mouth that your survival instincts would normally flag as hazardous biological waste. You find a seat at one of the heavy, rough-hewn trestle tables. The wood is scarred with knife marks, initials carved by bored soldiers, and deep, dark stains that represent a geological history of spilled ale and gravy. You sit down on a bench that wobbles alarmingly, threatening to dump you onto the rush-covered floor, and wait for service. The menu is not extensive. In fact, it is singular. You are having the house specialty. You are having pottage. Pottage is the great equalizer of medieval cuisine. It is a stew, technically, but that word implies a certain level of recipe planning that is absent here. This pottage is a thick, gray-brown sludge that has been bubbling in the madam's cauldron since the beginning of time. It is a perpetual stew. This is a mainstream historical fact. Many households and inns kept a pot simmering constantly, 24/7. They would just throw new ingredients in as the level dropped. A turnip here, a cabbage there, a chunk of meat when they got lucky. It means you are technically eating a meal that spans generations. The broth you sip might contain the ghostly essence of a carrot from last Tuesday. A serving girl slams a wooden bowl down in front of you. The spoon is wooden, splintery, and shallow, meaning you will be doing more shoveling than sipping. You look into the bowl. The pottage stares back. It is a culinary beige, a texture that sits somewhere between oatmeal and wet concrete. Floating in the center is a piece of mysterious meat. In a high-end castle, you might get venison or pork. Here, the protein source is the subject of optimistic experimentation. It might be an unlucky chicken that stopped laying eggs. It might be a piece of salted pork so old it has mummified. Or, glancing at the corner where the dull rat usually sits, you might wonder if the population of the room has recently decreased by one. You decide not to ask. In the culinary world of the underbelly, ignorance is the only seasoning available. But the pottage is only half the battle. The true test of your dental insurance, which, remember, does not exist, is the bread. The girl drops a hunk of bread onto the table. It hits the wood with a heavy, dull thud, like a brick landing in mud. This is not the fluffy, air-filled sourdough of your local bakery. This is a weaponized carbohydrate. It is likely horse bread or a rough maslin loaf made from a mix of wheat, rye, and pea flour. It is dense, dark, and incredibly tough. In fact, this bread is so tough it could legally be used as a defensive weapon. If a fight broke out, which, as we know, is forbidden by the parchment rules, you could easily pick up this loaf and use it to block a dagger thrust. It has the structural integrity of a sandbag. There is a quirky tidbit about medieval dining that explains the hardness. Bread was often used as a plate, known as a trencher. A large, stale loaf would be sliced horizontally, and the stew would be poured directly onto the bread. The bread absorbs the juices, becoming soggy and, theoretically, edible by the end of the meal. Eating your plate was usually something done by the very poor or the very hungry. Here, you get a bowl, but the bread on the side is clearly of trencher grade. It was baked to last, not to please. You pick up the bread. It feels cold and heavy. You try to tear off a piece, but the crust fights back. It requires a two-handed torque-out maneuver to rip a chunk free. You dip it into the pottage, hoping the hot liquid will soften it. It's like dipping a rock into mud. The bread softens slightly, but the center remains stubbornly hard. As you chew, a rhythmic, jaw-aching exercise that will burn more calories than you are consuming, you realize the flavor profile is earthy. You taste the rye, the peas, and inevitably a bit of grit. Millstones in this era gradually ground down as they worked, meaning a small percentage of every loaf is literally stone dust. It's bad for your teeth, but hey, it adds minerals. To wash down this defensive bread and mystery stew, you reach for your tankard. You might be craving a glass of crisp, cold water. Stop that thought immediately. In the medieval city, water is the enemy. The local river is the sewer, the laundry, and the industrial waste disposal system, all rolled into one. Drinking unboiled water is a game of Russian roulette where the bullet is dysentery. So, the beverage of choice for everyone from toddlers to the elderly is ale. But don't get excited. This isn't a craft IPA with notes of citrus and hops. This is small beer. It is a weak, cloudy, fermented grain water with a very low alcohol content, just enough to kill the bacteria, but not enough to get you truly drunk, unless you drink 3 gallons of it. It tastes sour, flat, and thin. It's diluted liquor in the saddest sense. It's hydration with a yeast infection. You take a sip. It's tepid. The flavor is reminiscent of liquid bread that went off. But it's safe. It's the only thing in the room that won't actively try to kill you from the inside out. Historians still argue about the nutritional value of the peasant diet. Some claim it was actually healthier than the noble diet, rich in vegetables, whole grains, and low in sugar. They argue that if you survived childhood and the plague, you might have had decent cholesterol levels. Standing here, gnawing on a piece of bread that feels like a roof tile, you find it hard to feel superior to the nobles eating roasted swan. You feel like you are eating a compost heap that has been cooked to safety standards. The dining experience is communal, which is a polite way of saying, guard your food. You are sharing the table with a merchant who eats with his mouth open, displaying a partially masticated onion to the world. There are no forks. Forks are considered an affectation of the Italians and vaguely diabolical. You have a spoon for the liquid, but for the solids, you have your fingers and your own personal knife. You pull your knife from your belt. It's a utility tool. You used it to cut a rope earlier, maybe cleaned your fingernails with it, and now you are using it to spear a chunk of gristle in your stew. Hygiene is a spectrum, and you are on the far end of it. As you eat, you notice the entertainment. Since there are no high-paying customers at the moment, the staff isn't putting on a big show. Instead, you get the budget version. A serving boy is juggling 3 turnips in the corner, looking bored. Someone is plucking a lute that is missing a string, producing a discordant plink-plonk sound that matches the rhythm of your chewing. It is improvisational and low budget. At one point, a piece of your defensive bread falls onto the floor. Before you can even consider the 5-second rule, a shadow moves under the table. Brutus, the ancient mastiff, inhales the rock-hard dough without chewing. You hear a crunch that sounds like a bone breaking, but it was just the bread. Brutus looks at you, waiting for more. He is the garbage disposal unit of the establishment. The atmosphere in the room while eating is a mix of exhaustion and sustenance. The smell of regret is temporarily masked by the smell of onions and boiled cabbage. It's a heavy, humid scent that coats the back of your throat. You look around at your fellow diners, men huddled over their bowls, protecting their food with their elbows, eyes darting around. Eating here is a primal act. It's not about enjoyment, it's about fueling the engine for another day of survival. You finish the pottage, scraping the bottom of the wooden bowl with your splintery spoon to get the last of the gray sludge. You are full, in the sense that your stomach is now heavy with dense matter. You feel the small beer sloshing around. You have survived the meal. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, because napkins are a futuristic fantasy, and lean back on the wobbly bench. You have consumed the mystery meat. You have defeated the bread. You are hydrated with sour grain water. You are now ready to face whatever else the night throws at you, provided it doesn't involve moving quickly, because that bread is currently sitting in your gut like a lead anchor. With the leaden weight of the pottage now settling into your stomach like a cobblestone, you lean back against the greasy timber wall and watch the ecosystem of the room shift. The dinner lull is ending. The door to the street bangs open, letting in a swirl of cold fog and the distant sound of the curfew bell, and the first wave of the evening's real clientele begins to wash in. You are about to witness the collision of two very different worlds, the frantic economy of trade and the brutal reality of war. First come the merchants. You can spot them instantly. They move with a specific kind of hurried anxiety that transcends time. In the modern world, these are the guys running through the airport in wrinkled suits, shouting into Bluetooth headsets about quarterly projections. Here, they are men in fur-trimmed robes that have seen too much rain, clutching leather satchels to their chests as if they contain the crown jewels. They are the frequent flyers of the medieval world. They step into the brothel not with a swagger, but with a scan. They are assessing the risks. Is the fire warm? Is the ale watered down? Is that mercenary in the corner going to stab me for my shoes? They are creatures of efficiency. A mainstream historical fact to keep in mind is that the medieval merchant class was exploding during this period. The commercial revolution meant that men were traveling further than ever before, from the wool markets of Flanders to the spice ports of Venice. This travel created a massive demand for accommodation. Inns and stews like this weren't just dens of vice. They were the holiday inns of the 14th century, essential infrastructure for the global economy. These merchants, however, are a fussy bunch. You watch one man, a cloth trader by the look of his stained fingers, blue from woad dye, approach the madam. He doesn't just ask for a room, he negotiates. He haggles over the price of the straw, the temperature of the water, and the rental fees for companionship. He treats the entire interaction like a bulk purchase of salted herring. According to the prompt's specs, these merchants prefer the frame and default to the entire room for 20 minutes. This is a polite way of saying they are here for a quick transaction. They are efficient lovers, or perhaps just busy ones. They treat intimacy like a line item on a ledger, something to be crossed off so they can get back to worrying about the price of grain in storm-swept markets. They huddle in small clusters near the fire, but they never fully relax. They are constantly checking their surroundings, their hands hovering near their hidden purses. They speak in hushed tones about tariffs, tolls, and the dishonesty of the local weighing scales. To them, the brothel is just another marketplace, another place to be cheated if they aren't careful. They drink their watered-down ale quickly, eyes darting toward the door, always ready to move to the next town, the next deal, the next bed. Then the door opens again, harder this time. It doesn't just open, it is kicked, and the atmosphere in the room changes from anxious commerce to aggressive party. Enter the soldiers. If the merchants are the corporate travelers, the soldiers are the frat boys on spring break, except the frat boys are armed with poleaxes and have likely killed people. They arrive in a pack, a clique of noise and metal. They bring the outside in with them. They are coated in mud. It's not just a splash of dirt, it is a geological layer. The mud is on their boots, their cloaks, and plastered into their beards. They are literally tracking the battlefield into the common room. They are loud. The silence of the merchants is shattered by booming laughter, the clattering of scabbards against benches, and the heavy thud of armored bodies hitting wooden seats. They take up space. They sprawl. A soldier doesn't sit on a bench. He conquers it. He throws his leg over it, spreads his arms, and dares anyone to ask him to move. Their fashion is a stark contrast to the merchants' drab wool. These men are wearing gambesons, thick, padded jackets worn under armor or as standalone protection. These jackets are stuffed with horsehair, wool, or scrap linen, and after weeks on the march, they smell truly horrific. It is the scent of old sweat, wet dog, and iron. It is a smell that announces their arrival before you even see them. Here is a quirky tidbit about their appearance. Observe the codpiece. In this era, male fashion took a strange turn where the flap covering the groin became a padded, exaggerated fashion statement. Soldiers, in particular, loved this trend. You see men walking around with codpieces that are brightly colored, padded to absurd sizes, and sometimes even used as pockets to store coins or handkerchiefs. It is the ultimate disastrous fashion, a mix of toxic masculinity and utility storage. The soldiers are here to spend money, and they do it with a chaotic generosity that terrifies the merchants. They throw coins on the table, silver groats that spin and wobble. They order the entire room of ale. They demand music. They shout at the juggler to juggle faster. But if you look closely, past the mud and the bravado, you see the cracks. You see a man whose hands shake slightly when he isn't holding a tankard. You see another staring into the fire with a 1,000-yard stare that predates the invention of the yard. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers suffered from what we now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Some scholars argue that because violence was so ubiquitous in their daily lives, public executions, animal slaughter, constant skirmishes, they were more desensitized to it than modern humans. Others argue that the human brain has always processed trauma the same way, and that these rowdy behaviors, the drinking, the fighting, the excessive noise, were actually coping mechanisms for men who had seen their friends died in muddy fields for a king they'd never met. Watching them now, you lean toward the second theory. Their laughter is a little too loud, a little too sharp. It's the sound of men trying to drown out the silence in their own heads. They are looking for a distraction, and this brothel, with its smoke and noise, is the perfect anesthesia. The interaction between the two groups, the merchants and the soldiers, is a fascinating study in social physics. They are like oil and water. The merchants shrink into their furs, trying to become invisible, terrified that a drunken gesture from a soldier will knock over their ale or start a brawl. The soldiers, conversely, view the merchants with open contempt. To them, the merchants are soft, coin-counting parasites who profit from the wars the soldiers fight. You watch a soldier bump into a merchant's table. The merchant freezes, his knuckles white on his cup. The soldier pauses, looks down, burps loudly, and moves on without an apology. The tension deflates, but the air remains charged. The madam watches from her counter, her hand resting near the iron ladle. She knows that mixing these two demographics is like mixing gunpowder and fire. It's profitable, but volatile. The noise level in the room has now reached a feverish pitch. The gentle hum of the early evening is gone, replaced by a roar of bartering and boasting. The air is thicker, too, enriched by the steam rising from drying military gear and the anxious sweat of the businessmen. You are seeing the full spectrum of the medieval economy in one room. The ones who move the money and the ones who take the money by force. They are both tired, they are both dirty, and they are both looking for the exact same thing: a warm bowl of pottage, a dry spot to sit, and a few hours where they don't have to be a merchant or a soldier, but just a human being trying to get warm. You shrink back into the shadows of your pillar, happy to be an observer. You don't have a ledger to balance, and you don't have a sword to sharpen. You are just a tourist in the darkest hell, watching the demons clock in for their shift. The room spins slightly. Perhaps it's the small beer, or perhaps it's just the sheer kinetic energy of the crowd. The night is young, the mud is fresh, and the brothel is officially open for business. As the soldiers shout for more ale, and the merchants frantically whisper about profit margins, your gaze drifts to the edges of the room. Here, in the shadows that the flickering tallow candles don't quite reach, you find the other inhabitants of this ecosystem. They are the outliers, the ones who don't fit the standard demographic of horny mercenary or stressed businessman. These are the accidental guests and the hypocritical observers, the tourists and the passengers. First, let's look at the tourists. Now, when I say tourists, don't picture people in Hawaiian shirts looking for a magnet to put on their fridge. In the medieval period, tourism usually meant one thing: pilgrimage. These are the people who are on the road not for profit or war, but for their souls, or at least, that's what they told their neighbors when they left. They are traveling to Canterbury, to Santiago de Compostela, or perhaps just to the local shrine, where a saint's finger bone is rumored to cure back pain. They sit huddled together on the benches furthest from the fire, clutching their bowls of gray pottage as if they are made of gold. They look utterly exhausted. You can see the road on them. Their cloaks are heavy with mud, their shoes are worn thin, and their faces have that specific hollowed-out look that comes from walking 20 miles a day in bad weather. To them, this brothel isn't a den of iniquity. It's a miracle. It's a roof. It's a place where the rain isn't falling on their heads. They are the customers who are grateful only for the shelter. They don't care about the madam's iron ladle or the questionable hygiene of the rusty tub. They just want the heat. They are the ones who likely knocked on the door of the reputable inn down the street, found it full, and were directed here by a sympathetic or sadistic stable boy. There is a mainstream historical fact that explains their presence. Medieval hospitality was a hit-or-miss affair. While monasteries were technically supposed to host pilgrims, they often got overwhelmed. Commercial inns were expensive, so stews and alehouses often picked up the overflow. It wasn't uncommon for a pious family on a pilgrimage to end up sleeping on the floor of a brothel simply because there was nowhere else to go. It's a room at the inn situation, but with more gambling and venereal disease. You watch a group of them, a family perhaps, or a group of neighbors from the same village. They are sharing a single loaf of that defensive bread, passing it around with a solemnity that makes it look like a religious ritual. They try to ignore the chaotic reality around them. When a soldier laughs too loudly or a serving girl accidentally spills ale, they don't look up. They stare into their pottage, engaging in a collective act of denial. They are mentally blocking out the feverish dream and pretending they are in a nice, quiet barn. But if the tourists are trying to be invisible, the passengers are trying to be unnoticeable, which is a very different thing. You spot him in the corner, a man sitting alone with a tankard he hasn't touched in 20 minutes. He is wearing a hood pulled low over his face, but the fabric of his tunic is a little too fine, the cut a little too precise. He has too much education written all over his posture. He isn't slumped like the soldiers. He sits with a straight spine. His hands, resting on the sticky table, are not calloused from a plow or a sword handle. They are stained with ink. This is a passenger. In the slang of the prompt, he is someone who is technically just passing through, but whose presence is an open secret. He claims to be here to check the spiritual health of the brothel. He is likely a cleric, a scribe, or a minor official from the church courts. He tells himself, and anyone who asks, that he is here on official business. He is observing. He is cataloging the sins. He is ensuring that the madame is following the rules of the church, which confusingly often licensed these places. He is the medieval equivalent of a health inspector, but instead of checking for salmonella, he is checking for moral decay. However, as the prompt notes, it's actually common knowledge why he is really here. He's not checking the spiritual health, he's checking the inventory. He watches the room with a gaze that is a mix of condemnation and curiosity. He is the hypocrite in the corner. He represents the complex relationship the medieval world had with sin. They condemned it from the pulpit on Sunday morning, but on Tuesday night, they were leasing the land to the madam and collecting the rent. Historians still argue about the true extent of clerical involvement in the sex trade. We know that the Bishop of Winchester owned most of the brothels in Southwark. The women were called Winchester geese. But was this purely a landlord situation, or were the clerics frequent patrons? The records of visitations, inspections, suggest that priests and monks were caught in these places with hilarious frequency. They often claimed they were there to save souls or admonish the wicked. Standing here, watching this passenger eye a serving girl while pretending to read a small book, you find the saving souls excuse a bit thin. The passenger adds a layer of intellectual tension to the room. The soldiers ignore him because he looks boring. The merchants ignore him because he looks like a tax collector. But the madam, she watches him. She knows who he is. She knows that his report could cause her trouble, or it could just be a prelude to a bribe. There is a quirky tidbit about this dynamic. In some cities, there were laws that specifically forbade men of the cloth from entering brothels, but there were also loopholes you could drive a cart through. Some clerics would wear secular clothes, like the man in the corner, to blend in, a practice that was constantly preached against, but universally practiced. It's the Clark Kent disguise of the Middle Ages. Take off the robe, put on a tunic, and suddenly you're just another sinner. The interaction between the tourists and the passenger is non-existent, yet deeply ironic. The tourists are the actual faithful, the pilgrims trying to get to a holy site, forced to sleep in a brothel. The passenger is the representative of the faith, voluntarily sitting in the brothel while pretending to work. It's a perfect snapshot of the era's contradictions. You watch the passenger take a sip of his ale. He grimaces. It's the diluted liquor we talked about earlier, but he keeps drinking. He is part of the research. He needs to know exactly how bad the ale is so he can write it down. Yes, let's go with that. The atmosphere around these two groups is quieter, heavier. The tourists bring a wet dog smell of damp wool and exhaustion. The passenger brings the scent of parchment and guilt. They anchor the room in reality. If the soldiers are the fantasy of war and the merchants are the fantasy of wealth, these people are the reality of travel and bureaucracy. You realize that for the tourists, this night is an ordeal to be survived. They will wake up at dawn before the rooster in your room even thinks about crowing and flee this place as if it were on fire. They will tell stories about the den of vice they survived, exaggerating the danger to impress their neighbors back home. For the passenger, the night is a negotiation. He is negotiating with his vows, with his wallet, and with the madam. He will likely stay late, leave quietly, and be back in his scriptorium tomorrow, writing a furious treatise on the evils of the flesh, fueled by the very ale he is currently nursing. The room feels fuller now. You have the fighters, the traitors, the weary travelers, and the spies. It's a full cast of characters for this feverish dream. The noise level is high, a wall of sound that allows for a strange kind of privacy. You can be alone in a crowd here. The tourists are asleep with their eyes open. The passenger is lost in his studies. You take a moment to appreciate the diversity of the misery here. Everyone is uncomfortable, but in their own unique way. The tourists are physically miserable. The passenger is morally miserable. You, leaning against the greasy pillar with a stomach full of stone-heavy bread, are just generally miserable. It's a shared experience. As the night deepens, the line between these groups starts to blur. The smoke from the fire and the candles creates a haze that softens the edges. The soldier's shout merges with the merchant's whisper. The tourist's snore blends with the passenger's sigh. You are all just bodies in a box, hiding from the dark, cold world outside. You decide it's time to stop people watching. The passenger's gaze is getting a little too close to your direction, and you don't want to be the subject of his spiritual inspection. You have your own problems to deal with, namely, surviving until morning without getting fleas or getting in a fight. But before you retreat, you give a mental nod to the tourists. They are the true survivors here. They just wanted a bed, and they got a circus. The rush of the soldiers and the frantic haggling of the merchants eventually dies down into a steady, low-level hum. The room has reached an equilibrium. Everyone has their pottage, everyone has their spot on a bench, and the initial chaotic energy has settled into a hazy, alcohol-fueled stupor. But human beings are easily bored creatures. In the modern world, this is the moment you would pull out your phone to scroll through Instagram or check the news. Here, there are no screens. There is only the room, the smoke, and the desperate need for distraction. Welcome to the evening entertainment. If you were expecting a skilled lute player or a bard reciting epic poetry about dragons, lower your expectations. Lower them further. Keep going until they hit the rush-covered floor. That kind of talent costs money, and the madam does not pay for premium content. Instead, the entertainment here is strictly improvisational and low budget. It is the medieval equivalent of a very bad open mic night that never ends. The centerpiece of tonight's cultural program appears to be a puppet show, but do not picture intricate wooden marionettes on strings. That is high art. This is found object theater. A man, possibly a failed jester, possibly just a drunk with too much time on his hands, has climbed onto a table. He has taken off one of his socks, a brave move in this climate, and drawn a face on it with a piece of charcoal. This is the protagonist. For the antagonist, he is holding a large, lumpy turnip that he likely stole from the kitchen. You watch, mesmerized by the sheer absurdity, as the sock and the turnip engage in a dramatic reenactment of a famous battle or perhaps a domestic dispute between the king and queen. The production values are non-existent. The dialogue is mostly grunts and high-pitched squeaking voices that the performer seems to think sound like nobility. "Oh, Lord Turnip, you have betrayed the realm," the sock declares in a falsetto that cracks the glass of your patience. "Nay, Sir Sock, it is you who smells of feet," retorts the turnip, voiced by the same man, now growling. It is objectively terrible. It is low budget to a degree that defies logic. Yet, looking around the room, you see that the audience is captivated. Soldiers are leaning forward, tankards paused halfway to their mouths. Merchants are chuckling. In a world where entertainment is scarce, a man arguing with a root vegetable is practically Broadway. It's a testament to the power of imagination, or the power of small beer. When the puppet show concludes, usually with the turnip being violently thrown into the crowd, the musical portion of the evening begins. This involves off-key singing that would make a choirmaster weep. There is a mainstream historical fact here. Music was everywhere in the Middle Ages, but professional musicians formed guilds and were often quite protective of their trade. They wouldn't be caught dead playing for free in a stew like this. So, what you get instead are the scabs of the music world. Amateurs, drunks, and people who think volume is a substitute for pitch. Someone starts singing a ballad. It's a chanson de geste, a song of deeds, but they've forgotten half the lyrics and are improvising verses about the madam's pottage. The crowd joins in on the chorus, a roaring, discordant wall of sound that vibrates the timber beams. It's not about hitting the notes. It's about the communal release of noise. It's a primal scream therapy session set to a folk melody. And then there are the dangerous throwing games. As the night wears on and coordination decreases, objects start to fly. Remember that defensive bread we discussed? It now finds its true calling as a projectile. A crust sails across the room and bounces off a soldier's helmet with a metallic ping. Laughter erupts. A tallow candle stub follows, tracing a greasy arc through the smoke. This is the medieval version of darts, but the target is anyone not paying attention, and the safety regulations are non-existent. You find yourself ducking as a piece of cheese whizzes past your ear. It's a dangerous pastime, but in a room full of people who carry swords for a living, dodging a flying bun is considered light cardio. But the real entertainment, the true reason many people are here, whether they admit it or not, isn't the puppets or the flying food. It is the grapevine. The brothel is the fastest information network in the medieval world. It is the fiber optic cable of the 14th century. Think about it. This room contains soldiers from the front lines, merchants from distant cities, sailors from foreign ports, and locals who know every dirty secret in town. It is a nexus of information. You lean back against your pillar and just listen. You tune out the singing and tune in the whispers. This is where the real news happens. "I heard the king is sick," a merchant whispers to a traveler, coughing up blood. "They say the prince is already fitting himself for the crown." "Nay," the traveler replies, leaning in. "I came from the capital. The king is fine. It's the queen who's been seen with the Duke of York." The wool shipment from Flanders is delayed, another voice murmurs. Pirates in the Channel. The price of cloth is going to double by Michaelmas. Did you hear about the baker? A local asks. Caught putting sawdust in the bread. The guild is going to nail his ear to the doorpost tomorrow. It is a whirlwind of rumors, facts, lies, and speculation. Historians often marvel at how quickly news traveled in the pre-modern world. A battle could happen in France on Tuesday, and by Friday, people in a London tavern would be discussing the casualty count. This room explains how. The grapevine is powered by alcohol and the human need to be the one who knows something. There is a quirky tidbit about this information flow. In an era without newspapers, news was often treated as a commodity. You could actually trade a piece of juicy gossip for a drink. I'll tell you who the sheriff is sleeping with if you buy me an ale is a legitimate business transaction here. The madam, of course, is the ultimate broker of this information. She collects it all, filters it, and uses it to keep her establishment safe and profitable. You realize that you are sitting in a living, breathing internet forum. The sock puppet on the table is the original troll. The soldiers shouting over each other are the comment section. The passenger in the corner, scribbling in his book, is the moderator who has lost control. But just like the modern internet, you have to verify your sources. Is that soldier really back from the crusade, or did he just buy a rusty sword at a pawn shop? Is that merchant really rich, or is he wearing his only nice coat? The rumor mill is rife with fake news. Panic spreads easily here. If someone yells plague, the room will clear out in 10 seconds flat, leaving only the rats and the very drunk. There is a fascinating scholarly debate about the role of these spaces in sedition. Governments hated these places because this is where rebellions started. It wasn't in the town squares, it was in the back rooms of alehouses, where men could grumble about taxes without a royal spy, usually, listening. The no singing rule might be less about noise and more about stopping people from singing, "The king is a tyrant and we should all buy pitchforks." As you listen, you piece together a picture of the world outside. You learn which roads are washed out, which lords are hiring mercenaries, and which towns have the best beer. It is a survival guide delivered via gossip. You watch the sock puppet man finally lose his balance and fall off the table to scattered applause. The entertainment portion of the evening seems to be winding down, or perhaps just transitioning into the everyone passes out phase. The atmosphere is thick with connection. For all the filth, the fleas, and the danger, there is a community here. For a few hours, these strangers are bound together by the stories they tell and the lies they believe. The feverish dream of the brothel isn't just a nightmare, it's a collective hallucination that keeps the darkness of the real world at bay. You catch a snippet of conversation from the passenger in the corner who has finally put down his book. He is talking to a serving girl, not about sin, but about the weather in the north. Even the spy is part of the network. Even the hypocrite needs to know if it's going to rain. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the wash of voices flow over you. The sound of the sock puppet's squeaky voice, the thud of bread hitting a helmet, the whisper of treason in the shadows. This is the soundtrack of the city. It is chaotic, unreliable, and completely immersive. You are plugged into the mainframe. You are online. As the night settles into a rhythm of low murmurs and occasional snoring, your attention shifts to the perimeter. In a place as volatile as this, where alcohol flows, swords are loose, and the no singing rule is flagrantly ignored, you have to wonder who is actually keeping the peace. Who stops the chaos inside from becoming a riot? And who stops the dangers of the street from smashing through the door? You turn your gaze toward the entrance, where the draft sweeps in under the heavy oak door. There, lying on a pile of what looks like discarded sacks and old bones, is the establishment's head of security. He is not a burly man with a club. He is not a knight in shining armor. He is a biological weapon of mass destruction wrapped in loose skin. Meet Brutus. Brutus is an ancient mastiff. To call him a dog feels like an understatement. He is more like a small, hairy piece of furniture that occasionally breathes. He is massive, even lying down. He occupies the same square footage as a dining table. His coat is a patchwork of scars, matted fur, and bald spots that tell the story of a long, violent life. He looks like he was assembled from the spare parts of other, lesser dogs. In the modern world, we have bouncers with earpieces and clipboards. We have TSA agents with scanners. Here, you have Brutus. And frankly, Brutus is more effective. He is the gatekeeper in the truest sense. He doesn't need to ask for ID. He operates on a biometric level. The prompt mentions that he has the ability to detect liars, but scientifically speaking, he detects pheromones. He smells fear. He smells adrenaline. He smells the specific, acrid sweat of a man who is thinking about drawing a dagger. When someone walks in with bad intentions, Brutus doesn't bark. Barking is for amateurs. He simply emits a low, subterranean growl that vibrates the floorboards. It is a sound felt in the bowels rather than heard with the ears. It is the acoustic equivalent of an earthquake warning. There is a mainstream historical fact here to ground this beast in reality. In the Middle Ages, mastiffs and alans were serious working animals. They weren't pets. They were used for bear baiting, hunting wild boars, and even as war dogs. The English Mastiff, in particular, was legendary for its ability to pull a knight off a horse. Brutus is a descendant of these war machines. He is a retired veteran, likely having served in a local lord's kennel before retiring to the private sector of the brothel. He brings a level of military professionalism to the job that the human staff lacks. His payment structure is simple and transparent, a model of efficiency that modern HR departments could learn from. He is paid in leftover bones and the right to sleep anywhere. You watch as the serving girl tosses him a knucklebone from a pork shank. It lands near his nose. One eye opens, a milky, bloodshot orb that looks like a marble dropped in red ink. He doesn't lunge for it. He inhales, assessing the quality of the offering, and then, with a slowness that implies he is doing the girl a favor, he opens his massive jaws and engulfs the bone. Crunch. The sound echoes through the room, louder than the lute player. It serves as a reminder to everyone present. My jaws can crush bone. Your ankle is made of bone. Do the math. Brutus is technically part of a team. The prompt mentions that disorder is corrected by Marjorie. Marjorie is likely the human enforcer, a large woman with arms like tree trunks who physically throws people out. But let's be honest, Marjorie is the muscle. Brutus is the soul of the operation. Marjorie can be bribed with ale or coin. Brutus cannot be bought. You cannot reason with a mastiff. You cannot promise him a promotion. He has his bone, he has his rug, and if you disturb his peace, he will remove you from the equation. There is a quirky tidbit about medieval dog laws that fits Brutus perfectly. In forest laws of the time, large dogs owned by commoners living near royal forests often had to be lawed or expedited, which meant having their claws removed or toes cut to prevent them from chasing the king's deer. Looking at Brutus's massive paws, you see his claws are intact. This suggests the madam pays a fine to keep him fully weaponized. He is an illegal weapon, a licensed irregularity. The security system he provides is based entirely on intimidation and apathy. Most of the time, he is asleep. He snores with a sound like a clogged drain. But his sleeping form is a barrier. To enter or leave, you have to step over him. This is a psychological test. If you can step over a sleeping 150-pound war dog without waking him, you are sober enough to be here. If you trip over him, you wake the beast, and the correction is immediate. You watch a drunken soldier try to leave. He stumbles, his boot clipping Brutus's flank. The room holds its breath. The snoring stops. The massive head lifts. The soldier freezes, suddenly sober. Brutus looks at the man, stares at the boot, and then, finding the soldier unworthy of the energy required to kill him, lets out a sigh that smells of rotting meat and goes back to sleep. The soldier practically runs out the door. Security protocol successful. The presence of Brutus adds a specific sensory note to the room. We've talked about smoke and unwashed bodies, but there is also the distinct, earthy musk of wet dog. It's a heavy, oily smell that hangs low to the ground. When it rains, and Brutus has been out in the courtyard, the smell intensifies to a level that is almost visible. It is the scent of safety. In a world of thieves and cutthroats, the smell of a large dog is the smell of protection. Historians still argue about the emotional relationship medieval people had with their dogs. Art and literature often depict them as loyal companions, like the dog at the feet of a knight on a tomb, but legal records show them as tools or nuisances. Was Brutus loved? Does the madam scratch him behind the ears when the customers are gone, or is he just a furry padlock? Watching him shift in his sleep, chasing dream rabbits with twitching paws, you like to think there's some affection there. He is the only male in the establishment who isn't expected to pay, isn't asked to fight, and isn't judged for his hygiene. He is the only one who is truly free. You also entrust your safety to his alarm system. Brutus might be deaf to the ambient noise of the brothel, the shouting, the singing, the breaking glass, but he is tuned to a different frequency. If the city watch were to march down the street, their boots hitting the cobblestones in a rhythmic march, Brutus would know before they turned the corner. If a fire started in the kitchen, he would smell the smoke before the humans noticed. He is the canary in the coal mine. If the canary weighed as much as a grown man and could bite through chainmail, there is a strange comfort in watching him. In this feverish dream of a building where everything feels precarious and transient, Brutus is a solid, heavy fact. He is a boulder in the stream. He anchors the room. You know that as long as Brutus is napping, things can't be that bad. If Brutus stands up and starts growling, that is when you dive out the window. You decide to pay your tribute. You have a leftover piece of that defensive bread in your pocket, the crust that was too hard to chew. You toss it toward the door. It lands near his paws. He doesn't open his eyes. He just extends a long pink tongue, snags the crust, and pulls it into his mouth. It disappears. You have paid the toll. You are now under his protection. As you lean back, you realize that in a way, Brutus is the perfect mascot for the boring history of the brothel. He is ugly, he smells, he is dangerous, and he is absolutely essential. He is a survivor of a harsh world, finding comfort in the warmth of a fire and the scraps of the feast. He is the guardian of the underbelly, And so, monitored by the ancient mastiff, the night rolls on. The game of hide and seek with the law continues, but you know the gatekeeper is on duty. He might be asleep, but he is watching. And heaven help the person who forgets that the rug has teeth. The night is finally winding down. The soldiers have either passed out on the benches or stumbled back to their barracks. The merchants have retreated to their rented corners, clutching their coin purses in their sleep. The feverish dream is cooling into a gray, hungover reality. Now comes the most painful part of the evening. It is not the hangover, nor the flea bites. It is the accounting. You stand before the madam's counter again. The iron ladle has been put away, replaced by a quill and a pot of ink that looks as black as the future. It is time to settle the books. It is time to discuss wages, deductions, and the terrifying concept of medieval microeconomics. In your hand, or perhaps in the small leather pouch tied to your belt, you have the night's earnings. It feels heavy. The silver pennies and groats clink together with a satisfying, substantial sound. For a brief, diluted moment, you feel rich. You calculate what you could buy with this. A new pair of shoes, a ticket on a cart out of this city, a piece of cheese that hasn't been gnawed on by a rat. But then, the madam clears her throat. It is a dry, dusty sound, like shuffling parchment. She opens her mental ledger, and the never-ending game of hide and seek with your money begins. First, let's look at the gross income. On paper, the brothel makes money, a lot of it. The rates for a room, for ale, and for companionship are high, inflated by the scarcity of the city and the desperation of the clientele. But here is the mainstream historical fact that ruins your day. The majority of people working in these establishments, effectively the independent contractors of the medieval gig economy, saw a fraction of that money. Most were trapped in a system of debt bondage that would make a modern predatory lender blush. The madam begins the subtraction. Room rent, she says, her voice flat. She takes a large scoop of your coins. You have to pay for the privilege of sleeping on that straw sack filled with crispy stalks and hosting the dull rat. It doesn't matter that the room is a fire hazard. It's prime real estate. The rent is exorbitant, designed specifically to ensure you never quite make enough to leave. Bored, she continues. Another scoop of coins disappears. This covers the pottage you ate, the one with the mystery meat and the defensive bread. You realize with horror that you have just paid restaurant prices for what was essentially boiled refuse. The small beer is also charged at a premium. In this house, hydration is a luxury service. Then come the fees. This is where the madam's creativity truly shines. The prompt mentions a deduction for damaged graphics. Now, in a modern context, that sounds like a computer error. In this 14th century hovel, it refers to the visuals of the establishment. Did you scratch the wattle and daub wall? That's a fine. Did a soldier spill wine on the faded, moth-eaten tapestry hanging in the hallway? That's a fine. Did the no singing rule get violated in your vicinity? That is a noise pollution tax. You are being fined for the wear and tear of the building itself. You are paying for the entropy of the universe. The madam inspects a small tear in your tunic, a tear that was there when you bought it, and somehow calculates that this visual downgrading reflects poorly on the house. She takes another coin. It is a maintenance fee for a building that hasn't been maintained since the Crusades. Next is the empty rental fee. This is the kicker. If the room sat empty for an hour because the soldiers were too busy fighting in the street or the merchants were too stingy, you are still liable for the potential revenue that could have been made. It is an opportunity cost tax. You are paying for the hypothetical customers who didn't show up. It is a logic so twisted it borders on art. By the time she is finished, the heavy pouch of coins has become very, very light. You are left with a meager sum. It is barely enough to buy breakfast tomorrow, let alone buy your freedom. You have worked all night, survived the threats of violence and disease, and your net profit is approximately 3 copper pennies and a headache. There is a quirky tidbit about the currency itself that adds to the misery. The coins you are left with are likely clipped. In the Middle Ages, people would shave the edges off silver coins to melt down the scraps for profit. This devalued the currency. So, even the few coins the madam graciously lets you keep might be rejected by the bakers down the street because they don't weigh enough. You are being paid in damaged goods. This system is not an accident. It is a feature. Historians still argue about the level of agency these women and workers had. Some court records show women owning property and leaving wills with significant assets, suggesting that some, like the madam, could rise to power. But for the average worker in the stews, the economic reality was a cycle of debt. The madam provides the clothes on loan for a fee, the food on credit for a fee, and the room for a fee. You are living in a company town that is just one building. You look at the pile of coins on the madam's side of the counter versus the pile on yours. It is a visual representation of feudalism. The lord, or in this case the lady, takes the harvest. The peasant keeps the chaff. There is also the matter of the taxes that the madam herself has to pay, which she inevitably passes down to you. The bishop or the city council demands a cut of the profits to look the other way. There are fines for breaching the peace, which are paid collectively. You are effectively subsidizing the corruption of the city officials. When the passenger from the corner, the spy, files his report, the bribe to make that report disappear comes out of your pocket. You scoop your meager earnings into your palm. The metal is cold. It smells of iron and thousands of dirty hands. It is the physical manifestation of your labor. You try to feel grateful. After all, you have a roof over your head, even if it leaks. You have Brutus to protect you, even if he smells like a wet rug. You have a community, even if they are thieves and liars. The madam closes her ledger with a heavy thud, the sound of a judge's gavel sealing your sentence for another night. She looks at you, her face impassive. She knows the math. She knows you can't leave. If you walked out the door now, you would be vagrant, vulnerable, and penniless. Here, at least, you are part of the system. As you turn away from the counter, you feel the weight of the economy pressing down on you. It is heavier than the wool tunic, heavier than the pottage. It is the crushing weight of subsistence. You are running on a hamster wheel made of oak and iron, generating wealth for everyone but yourself. You trudge back toward the hallway, passing the no singing sign. You don't feel like singing anyway. You feel like calculating. You wonder how many nights you have to work to afford a new pair of boots. You do the mental math, factoring in the rent, the food, the inevitable fines for damaged graphics. You realize the answer is forever. But there is a strange, dark humor in it. You are still here. You survived the night. You navigated the customers, the hygiene, and the rules. You have paid your dues to the madam and to the universe. You are broke, tired, and smell like a tavern, but you are alive. And in the medieval world, that is the only profit margin that truly counts. You head back to your room, to the crispy mattress and the judgmental rooster. The financial transaction is over. The biological one, sleep, is about to begin. You clutch your 3 clipped pennies in your hand like a talisman. They are small, they are pathetic, but they are yours. For now, you return to your room, clutching your meager earnings and navigating by the sound of the ancient rooster's heavy breathing. You collapse back onto the crispy straw mattress, but before you can let the exhaustion take you, you have to perform the final ritual of the night, the damage assessment. You need to check your check engine light. Living in a medieval brothel is a full contact sport, and your body is the scorecard. You are effectively living inside a bingo card of medieval diseases. It is a high-stakes game where the prizes are respiratory infections and skin rashes. You sit on the edge of the bed, disturbing the cats who have recolonized your blanket, and take inventory. First, there are the lice. We've discussed them as passengers in your clothes, but now you feel them as permanent residents of your scalp. They are the background static of your existence, a constant, low-level itch that reminds you you are alive and tasty. Then there is your skin. Between the lye soap, the rough wool, and the damp air, your epidermis has taken on the texture of dried parchment. It is wrinkled, chapped, and mapped with small red bites that could be from fleas, spiders, or the straw itself fighting back. Your lungs feel heavy. You take a breath, and you wheeze. This is the brothel cough. You have been inhaling a mixture of tallow smoke, particulate matter from the rotting rushes, and the dander of 50 unwashed strangers for hours. Your respiratory system is currently functioning as the building's air filter. But the big fear, the square on the bingo card that everyone is terrified of, is the Great Pox. Depending on exactly which decade of the medieval period we are in, syphilis is either a terrifying rumor from the South or a very present reality. In the prompt's specific timeline, it is listed as a major concern. It is the specter that haunts the establishment. It is the reason the madam checks the girls and the customers with such clinical, ruthless efficiency. It is a disease that turns the body against itself, a slow-moving horror that no amount of small beer can wash away. So, how do you treat these ailments? You turn to the medical kit. In a modern hotel, this would be a box of Band-Aids and some Tylenol. Here, the medicine cabinet is indistinguishable from the pantry. Medieval medicine is essentially a series of optimistic experiments performed by people who think ghosts cause fevers. You have a bruise on your shin where you walked into a bench in the dark. The prescription? Onions. You reach into your pack, or perhaps you grabbed one from the kitchen on your way out and produce a raw onion. You slice it open with your utility knife, the same one you use to eat the pottage, and rub the raw, weeping vegetable directly onto your bruise. The theory is that the onion will draw out the bad humors causing the pain. The reality is that you now smell like a soup. It is a treatment that adds olfactory assault to blunt force trauma. For the cut on your hand, sustained when you snagged it on a rusty nail in the doorframe, you use the sticky approach. You dab a bit of honey on it, maybe mixed with some crushed herbs if you're feeling fancy. This is actually a mainstream historical fact that holds up. Honey has antibacterial properties. It creates a barrier against the filth. So, for once, the optimistic experiment might actually save your hand from gangrene. You wrap it in a strip of linen that you hope is cleaner than the floor. But let's say you had something worse, Let's say a wound was festering, or you had a persistent pain that the onions couldn't fix. That is when you bring out the heavy artillery. That is when you face the Swiss Army knife of medieval surgery, the hot iron. Cauterization, the word alone, sends a shiver down your spine that has nothing to do with the draft. It is the application of red-hot metal to human flesh to stop bleeding or burn out infection. It is medicine as welding. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of these treatments. Was the cure worse than the disease? When the local barber surgeon, yes, the guy who cuts your hair also cuts off your leg, suggested a hot iron, did people run away, or did they view it with a grim, stoic acceptance? Standing in this room, looking at the candle flame, you realize it's probably the latter. Pain was a constant companion. You didn't expect to be comfortable, you just expected to survive. Fortunately, tonight you do not need the iron. You just have the onion, the honey, and the wheeze. You are managing your condition. You are practicing preventative maintenance in a world that wants to rust you out. You finish your medical routine. You wipe the onion juice off your hands onto your wool tunic, because why not add another layer of smell? And you prepare for the final act of the night. Sleep. You climb back into the bed. The crispy sound of the straw mattress is deafening in the quiet room. You maneuver around the cats, who make a noise of protest, but ultimately accept you as a warm piece of furniture. You locate the dull rat by the sound of his chewing in the corner and give him a wide berth. You check the rafters for the rooster. He is there, a dark, feathery lump, silent for now. You pull the scratchy wool blanket up to your chin. It offers warmth, but it also traps the smells of the room, the smoke, the sweat, the dog, the onions. It is a sensory cocoon. As you lie there, your body starts to relax. The tension of the never-ending game of hide and seek with the rules, the money, and the diseases begins to fade. You have made it. You have navigated the chaotic architecture, survived the mystery meat, paid your dues to the Iron Lady, and avoided the wrath of Brutus. The brothel settles down around you. The shouting has stopped. The singing has ended, likely enforced by Margery. The only sounds are the settling of the great timber beams, groaning under the weight of centuries, and the gentle, rhythmic sounds of 100 people sleeping in close proximity. It is a chorus of snores, coughs, and shifting straw. You realize that despite the filth, the fleas, and the fear, there is a strange safety here. You are inside, the world outside. The bandits, the wolves, the storms cannot get you tonight. You are part of the hive. You are just one more bee in the comb, safe in your sticky, crowded cell. You close your eyes. The darkness is absolute. The feverish dream of the day dissolves into the actual dreams of the night. You drift off, your mind filled with images of spinning coins, flying bread, and the comforting heavy weight of a cat on your feet. You are a traveler in time, and you have survived another day in history. Now, the fire in the great hearth has burned down to glowing embers, casting a deep, warm orange light across the empty common room. The smoke that hung so thickly in the air has begun to settle, drifting up into the rafters to join the shadows. The shouting and the laughter have faded, replaced by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the house itself. Listen to the sound of the rain beginning to fall outside. It taps gently against the heavy wooden shutters, a steady, soothing drumbeat that separates you from the cold, wet world beyond the walls. Tap, tap, tap. It is a sound of enclosure, of protection. You are safe in here. The thick timber walls, the daub, the heavy oak door guarded by the sleeping mastiff, they all stand between you and the night. Feel the heaviness in your own limbs now, the tension of the day, the haggling, the noise, the vigilance is melting away. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches. You sink deeper into the straw mattress, and even the rustling of the dry stalks sounds like a lullaby now, a whisper of nature brought indoors. The air is cool, but the blanket is warm. The presence of the animals near you, the slow purr of the cat, the soft shifting of the rooster, is no longer a nuisance, but a comfort. It is the sound of life, of warmth, of companionship in the dark. You have journeyed through the chaos of the medieval night, through the mud and the noise, and you have found this quiet corner of rest. The history books are closed, the ledger is put away. There is nothing left to calculate, nothing left to fear. There is only the dark, the warmth, and the sleep waiting to claim you. Let the darkness wrap around you like a heavy, soft cloak. Let the sound of the rain wash away the day. You are safe. You are warm. You are at rest.